Hello everybody, we're back to go ahead and change the screen on this iPhone 5S. You can see that it's pretty well shattered here. We got our new screen. We're going to actually do a housing replacement on this phone in the end, but we're going to change the display today. Change the color, we're going to change it to a green phone instead. Customize it just a little bit. We need a pentalobe screwdriver to remove the screws on the bottom of the phone to release the LCD. These two right here by the port. And we'll need a couple of pry tools and possibly a suction cup to help pull the screen off. Then a small Phillips screwdriver. We'll undo some screws in the upper right hand corner here. We'll go ahead and remove the bottom two screws first. One tool that I left out is actually the nylon spudger we'll use to disconnect the ribbon cables for the LCD, and a little bit of super glue as well. So let's unscrew these two screws on the bottom of the phone here. And pull them right out. The next step is to go ahead and remove the LCD. I'm going to put a suction cup on this. You can use just a suction cup to pull it off. If it's heavily cracked like this one is, the suction cup loses suction on the device. Oops, I powered it back on here. And it doesn't necessarily give you what you need to pull it off. Now you also want to be very careful when you're removing the screen as well, as there's a ribbon cable that holds the home button to the board underneath. So you want to start to pry it off slowly. You can probably pull it up at least 1.5 inches without damaging the cable at all. Just be a little bit careful as you remove the front LCD. Just using this guitar pick to go around the side of the screen. Go ahead and just pry up. You'll notice it usually gets stuck right about the midway point on the side of the screen, and that's because that's where it clips into the metal housing down the side. Once you get one side lifted, you can kind of put your pry tool in and you can wiggle it back and forth. I'd really prefer to use a plastic tool if this was a colored housing, black or green or any other color. But with it being silver, it's not the end of the world if you do put a scuff on it. It's much less noticeable. So here you can see that we have the cable that holds the button in. See it right here between my finger. There you go. What we're going to need to do is go ahead and remove the cable from the phone. There's also cables holding the LCD down at the top. So you can use a pry tool to pry this little ribbon cable off of the phone. This one's on here pretty good. I'm going to try this metal tool and see if I can get a little bit more leverage underneath it. Fortunately, it doesn't look to be so. You can loosen this screw here, and it seems to give a little bit extra leniency on the cable to pry off. Use our pry tool now, just get underneath it. Pop the top off of it that holds the cable down, this little connector piece here. So we'll go ahead and set that aside. Now with that done, we can go ahead and open the case up just a little bit. And then I'll reveal the ribbon cable for us right here at the top. We'll need to undo the four screws that hold this in. Before we do that, we're actually going to go ahead and remove the battery connection on the device. You can use a tool to pry hold the screen open for you as well. You need to undo 2 screws to get to the battery connector. There's a little silver housing over the battery connector that we're going to go ahead and remove. You can go ahead and pull that off and set it aside. Using our nylon tool here, we'll go ahead and just pry up the battery connector, like so. Just opening it. We don't want to pull the screen past a 90-degree angle. We don't want to damage any of the ribbon cables here if you're doing a glass-only replacement. Honestly, I think these LCD screens are probably the more economical they are now. You can probably just do one for almost the same cost. So I just do the full LCD replacement. Seems easier for me that way. Just undoing the screws here that hold this metal plate down. You can see that the plate just popped right off for us. Go ahead and set that aside. Now with that being done, we can go ahead and use our nylon tool. We're going to undo the ribbon cables here. This first one, the second one, then a third one for the back here. Perfect. Once that's done, we can go ahead and pull it off, and so we can set that aside. far, everything's looking good. The next thing we're going to need to do is take our new display here. You can see all the things we're going to remove. We're going to take the home button and the ribbon cable and move it over. You can see that we need to pull over the silver housing. This speaker portion here, the front-facing camera, will need to be removed for the new display as well. The first thing we're going to go ahead and do is remove the home button by taking out the 2 screws holding the home button down. Ribbon cable is slightly different on this device. You can see I just pulled it back to give me a little bit more play with the screw there. Be removing the second screw. Take the little metal housing off the back, and let it reveal the button and the cable. Next step is to try to pry this little cable up here. I'm going to go nice and slow. We definitely do not want to rip this. So you can see that we're taking it nice and easy. Now sometimes you can just press this button out and it's fine. Sometimes it has a little extra glue on the housing. If you have a really strong adhesive, just make sure you take your time so you don't rip the gasket around the button. We'll go ahead and set the home button aside. We have our speaker portion here. We have 2 screws that are holding this down. We'll start with the one that's closest to the display. We'll go ahead and remove that. These are different lengths of screws, so make sure you keep these 2 separated. The shorter one goes down towards the bottom of the display, and the one I'm taking out now is longer and fits up at the top of the display. Go ahead and wiggle this loose a little bit. There is a little portion of adhesive holding the contact points down here at the top. So I'm going to use my pry tool to get a little bit of a start on it there. We got the speaker portion out as it is magnetic, and we'll remove the filter here. Now you can see there's a little edge on this connector here. We need to make sure when we put this back on that this clips back underneath the phone here. You'll see there's a little opening for it. You want it to kind of snap into place. Now with that being done, we can go ahead and pull and kind of wiggle out the front-facing camera here. We'll start a little bit closer to the back side. You can see that there's a couple contacts with some adhesive on it. And it might help us if we pull off this sticker first that's holding the ribbon cable down to the LCD portion. Just take our time and pull that off. You can kind of wiggle out some of the other components. So we have our front-facing camera out. Take our time to go ahead and try to pry this ribbon cable up here. It's got a little bit of adhesive for this portion that's got that sticks kind of the 2 posts that stick out here. So we're just taking my pry tool and wiggling it underneath and getting a little separation here. We don't want to pull on it too much because we don't want to tear this portion. You could use a little bit of heat, very, very low heat to help loosen this, but normally if you just take your time and you're patient, you can just wiggle it off without a problem. Very close. Excellent, there we go. Go ahead and set this cable assembly aside. We're going to go ahead and remove the screws off the back of this metal panel here. I like to make sure I keep all of the screws in order to understand exactly where they came out of on the device, so I can put them in the exact same way. I just lay them out in the pattern in which I removed them. So the side screws on the sides and the top and bottom screw the top and bottom. of the little square I made with the screws. It's an easy way to keep your screws in order, make sure that you don't lose them. I have a little magnetic mat from iFixit. I think that's a fantastic tool. If you get one of those magnetic mats, it can be very helpful. You can go ahead and take this little metal housing out. You can see that we've removed the majority of the items off of that display. We have a couple more that we're going to go ahead and take off. So we're going to go ahead and peel the backing off of this new display. We can start to go ahead and reassemble this device. Taking the exact screws we just took off the other device on the other housing, we'll go ahead and put them back in. Starting with the top screw first. Now it is pretty smart not to put these in extremely snug. A lot of these frames are slightly deformed based upon adhesing to the LCD glass. So I put them in until they're screwing in. You can see that they're not going to fall out, but then I'll tighten them down here in just a second once I get everything lined up and nice and straight. The importance of that is if you don't get it pretty even, then the place that's down the sides, which clicks into the housing of the device, won't fit properly. Take you a lot more effort to get the screen to sit flush back onto the housing. So now I'll go around and tighten them up just a little bit more, make sure that they're all snug. So here's our camera assembly here. Now a lot of people will put this in without moving over the two little plastic components. I'm not a big fan of that. I want to make sure that the front facing camera sits nice and perfect in the display. It goes right here. So what I want to do is actually pull these off the old display here. See, they're right here. And this little plastic piece, I think it's for the proximity sensor. I'm not 100% sure, but I want to make sure they sit in the right place. So I'm just going to use my little dental pick here and slowly try to pry it out of its place. It is put down by some adhesive, and it's plastic, which is a harder plastic. You don't want to break it. So pry a little bit of pressure. The adhesive they use is pretty brittle. It's almost like super glue. So just take your time as you're pulling it off. We'll go ahead and set that aside. And our second one. Just make sure there wasn't any plastic left on there. Kind of came out a little bit hard there. So what I'm going to use next is just a little tiny bit of this crazy glue or super glue. This one comes with a nice little brush that makes it easy to apply. I'm going to use a pair of tweezers to kind of hold this, and so I can put it down in the right spot when I'm ready. You'll see that there's a thinner edge on this little piece of plastic, and that goes towards the bottom of the phone. Just tiny, tiny bits. You just want it to hold it in place. You don't need it to block or cloud the front-facing lens. So making sure it's in the right spot and just kind of pushing it down just a little bit, making sure it gets stuck. And then the second portion is this little tiny piece of plastic here as well. It's going to put a little tiny bit of super glue on it. The metal portion of this plastic piece goes down towards the housing that we just put onto the back of the LCD. Just try to take our time here as we do this. It is rounded on the right hand side, so you'll see that it fits in exactly onto the back of this display. You want to make sure you get it really, really close to being lined up perfect. If not, you'll have a little bit harder time getting your ribbon cable back in, the front facing camera, and so on. I'm going to give it a few seconds to dry. Perfect. The easiest way I find to do this is to make sure you put this little metal, I think it's the microphone, into the device here first. Then lining up the post for the little cable here onto the top portion. Then making sure that the front-facing camera goes into the slot we just glued into the front of the display. Usually it's pretty snug, and you can kind of feel it click into place when it's in the right order. Excellent. See this little metal, or this black gasket here, you make sure everything lines up into that. This little metal piece here needs to go into its correct spot. You see there's a little round hole to the right of an oval hole. Make sure you put it in the correct spot. Go ahead and put down the little black copper adhesive tape that we had holding the cable down. Alright, looks pretty good. Next step is to go ahead and put the earpiece speaker back in. See that I put the metal housing back onto the earpiece speaker here, making sure that see the offset screw piece down here at the bottom, and then the smaller screws that goes down the bottom. I find it easy to put the long screw in at the top first, so we'll go ahead and do that. Just going to make sure it's fitting snugly. Remember, I told you it had the little pieces that clip in. Make sure that it's not snagging on top of any of the display or the digitizer wires of the iPhone. If not, you'll get a short and your screen will act funny. Random touches. But make sure that it's clicked into the correct spot, like I showed you with the little kind of teeth that were sticking out when I removed it. Let's go ahead and put that in. It doesn't have to be extremely snug at this point. We'll put the screw in the bottom portion here as well. Just double checking to make sure that it's not snagging on any of the ribbon cables. You give this a couple extra turns here, make sure that it's nice and snug now. Now that both of the screws are in, that it sits flush with the display. There's a little piece of film adhesive that sits on top of the home button. Since this is a brand new screen, I'm going to cut it out so the home button will sit nice and flush as I'm reassembling. If not, it can get a little wobbly as the screws will fill snug, but they actually don't get snug. It's just pressing against this film. So I'm just going to cut a V shape or a little square shape out of this thing. Make sure that when I put my home button back in, that it sits nice and snug. I don't want to take it off until it's time to use the device. Now, like I was saying, if you have a new display, you can use a new home button. I got a black display because I have a new housing for this, which I want to use. I'm going to turn it green, so I have a black face here, and I'll get a green button for it as well. So I'm not worried about the white button at this point, but I'm going to show you how to reassemble this in. There's a little bit of adhesive that went around it. It's not the end of the world if you don't have that, as the two screws will hold this ribbon cable into place and the home button into place like you need it to be. So just making sure it fits nice and snug into this correct spot. Making sure the ribbon cable, there's a little post that it needs to fit in down here at the right hand side. Just make sure that it lines up onto that guide, and that ribbon cable will be in the correct spot for you. Just going to see if I can pull it just a little bit and get it onto that little guide post down here at the bottom. So right here, this little tiny, looks like an antenna connector of some sort, probably for the proximity sensor, or I mean the fingerprint scanner. So make sure that you put this back in. The standoff portion faces outwards and to the top of the phone. So the flange that's sticking up is upwards and to the top of the device. Hopefully you're diligent when you disassemble a phone and make sure you pay attention to the way that things come out. If so, this is one of the pieces that you want to make sure that you get correct. A little tricky to get it to line up correctly. So we're going to put it through the ribbon cable and then back into the little connector here. You know, before I do that, actually, I want to put the backing onto the home button here real fast. I don't want the ribbon cable to cover this up when I reassemble the device. Make it difficult to get these back on. And then I'll do the other portion here in just a second. Sorry about that. Might make it a little bit easier during the reassembly to do this piece first. First screw for the home button is in. We'll do the second screw now. Just going to double check to make sure the home button depresses properly and the button is clicking, which it is. And put our little antenna piece back in. It's a little tricky to get this to go in correctly as you're passing through the ribbon cable, through the little antenna connector, and then into the screw hole. Perfect. Make sure the cable sits nice and flush. Alright, the next step is to go ahead and reassemble the device since we have everything put back onto the display here. So we'll take this back ribbon connector first. Now it seems like this one doesn't clip on like all the other ones do. You normally can hear them snap pretty solid. You want to make sure that this one is very nice and snug as you're putting it back together. It's a little tricky to get in there, but make sure you press on the front portion and the rear portion. You can kind of give it a little tiny bit of a tug to make sure it's stuck on there nice and tight, but much more than a little tug will actually just pull it back off again. So just take your time and make sure that it's actually connected properly. I myself have had some problems with these ribbon cables not connecting securely. Then you get really weird touchscreen and display activity, lines and ghost inputs. So make sure that these are nice and snug before you reassemble the phone. Now you also want to make sure they're bending at the proper points. You don't want to get them snagged between the display and the phone or the housing. Put our little housing piece back on here real fast. Now what I would normally do is actually I'd test this screen before I put this housing piece back on. And I would suggest that you do that as well. Sometimes if the display is acting a little funny, you can actually use this metal plate though to make sure that the ribbon cables are securely connected. It does hold them down pretty snugly, which I'm guessing is why it's actually there in the interior of the phone. This is also very tricky of the reassembly since the phone is open and it's hard to get the screws to stay on your screwdriver and then go into the correct hole. So I'm just pushing down here at the top to make sure that it's snug. I don't want to put this plate on without the ribbon and cables being connected properly, as it could do damage to the device. One more to go. Excellent. Go ahead and just reconnect the battery here. Go ahead and power the device on and make sure the display is working properly. Excellent. We have a picture on the device, which is great. So we have our metal battery cover here. You can go ahead and put that back into place, making sure that you put it in the correct way that it came out. Screw fell off here, didn't want to go in correctly. Try again. Excellent, now it's nice and snug. We'll go ahead and just double check the touch on this, make sure that it's functioning correctly. Perfect. Can't test the home button just yet as we need to reconnect the cable. Just making sure everything's going to fit back properly. Taking the cable. This can get a little bit tricky. I find the easiest way is to kind of clamshell it and try to get the ribbon cable back in the correct spot first, and then just push down on it. You can actually move the screen a little bit to the side and then push it in that way as well. Normally if I dangle it over the top and give myself a lot of leeway with the cable, I can usually get it in there pretty quick. This one does not seem to be wanting to work for me though. Take a tool here and see if I can't get a little extra push on it. The best way is to just use your finger. So I'm going to move it to the side here. It is connected, and I'm going to take my little metal piece that clips on top of the cable. I'm going to push that in. There's a little, you can see a connector portion of it that's facing towards the right side of my screen right now. You'll see an indent into the screw portion that I removed where it's supposed to sit and kind of clip into place. Go ahead and put the screw back in. Alright. Go ahead and push the top portion in at the top first, and then clip down the sides of the device. See, it's a little tricky right here on the side. Sometimes you need to use a pry tool like I just did to kind of push in on the housing a little bit and get it to snap into place. Now if you have a big ding on your phone in the housing and it's not going to clip back into place, just use a X-Acto knife and you can kind of trim the housing away a little bit. I have an iPad Air glass replacement. You can actually see me do that in if you just search for it under my name. Go ahead and put our two screws in here at the bottom. And we now have successfully changed the screen assembly on an iPhone 5S. As always, thanks for watching, you guys. And if you want to check out the housing replacement, you'll see me gut this entire phone and put in a brand new housing and kind of customize it into a cool green color that's not normally used. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.